Welcome back to the Human Side of Emergency Management podcast. My name is Vivian Thompson and I'm your host. And today on the Human Side of Emergency Management podcast, I am joined by someone I have known and admired for more than 25 years, Professor Jason Sharples. Jason is one of Australia's leading experts in fire behaviour and extreme fire events. His research has changed the way we understand, predict and respond to the kinds of fires that reshape landscapes and affect our communities. I remember the first time he explained pyrocumulus nimbus clouds to me, and I've never heard the term before that. These fires created thunderstorms when intense heat pushes smoke and air high into the atmosphere. They can create lightning, strong winds, and even fire tornadoes. Jason has a gift for taking something complex and frightening and explaining it in a way that helps you understand it and respect it. Beyond the titles and the research papers, Jason has spent his career studying the forces that scare communities and challenge emergency services. He looks directly at fire when it's at its most unpredictable and destructive. He does this with a calm and thoughtful presence that has earned him deep respect across the sector. He is the kind of scientist you can sit with, have a conversation, and walk away with a clear understanding of the science. What I admire most about Jason is that he brings humanity into his work. He knows that behind every model, every forecast, and every extreme fire event, there are people, responders, families, and communities that rely on that knowledge that he can help create an understanding, and it carries its own emotional weight. Jason brings science, risk, foresight, and the quiet burden of someone who understands what is coming long before others do. His work sits at the point where fire behaviour, extreme events, and human responsibility meet. Today, we are not just talking about fire science. We are talking about what it means to dedicate your life to understanding danger, to carry the knowledge of what could happen, and to turn complex risk into information that can save lives. Jason, it's a privilege to have you here with me today. Thank you.
Wow, thanks, Viv. Good to be here.
I hope I got that right.
Sounds good to me.
Excellent. I just want to start off with just a question. I know you spent your career studying the most extreme and violent, I do call them violent because I have seen them, violent behaviours of fire, but what does it do to a person to spend so much time looking directly at something that is so destructive?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it humbles you a lot. When you really look at these extreme events, you can sort of see how, the forces that nature can really throw at you in its most sort of angry times. And it's huge, you get humbled straight away. I can still remember the first time I went out to a proper fire and just, the radiant heat coming off that thing was just nothing like I'd ever experienced before. I couldn't believe it. So, yeah, I mean, I think it really has a humbling effect on you, but I think, over the course of a career, it really changes the way you perceive these sorts of risks. It sort of, really gives you an appreciation for how vulnerable we are as humans and, how vulnerable our society is when we've got these sorts of events bearing down on us.
I can imagine there's an emotional cost to knowing what the fire can do long before the public or the decision makers really understand it. I guess that's part of your job.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sense of responsibility that comes with it as well. Having the knowledge you gain through science and knowing what it might mean for communities and people out there who have to face it. I think there's a real responsibility for us to really try and, get the message out there, really let people know about the sorts of risks these sorts of events can present. And and I think, it does have a bit of an emotional cost as well because, you see enough of these disasters unfold over the years that it sort of gets to you.
I can imagine it does because we've had many conversations about this over the years. You often see risks, I guess, with the research, and there's so much research going on now compared to what there was, 20, 30 years ago. But you often see those risks years before they actually become real at times as well. And it's that knowledge that you carry and that you want people to understand. It's such a complex environment. What was it like when you first started to understand what was actually happening and what was going on? Was it like a light bulb moment or was it like a slow burn?
I mean, I think there's aspects of both. Like, the nature of science is you'll often spend a lot of time just being confused, trying to figure stuff out, and then, stuff will come together in the right way and you'll have that light bulb moment. But yeah, I mean, it's again, it's sort of a bit of a difficult balance because, you as a scientist, you try to sort of look at things, very objectively, follow the evidence wherever it takes you, even if it takes you somewhere, where it's telling you something bad's going to happen. I guess at the end of the day, all we can really do is try and communicate the knowledge we have and the risks that, we're aware of the best we can, try and do it openly and honestly. And, I guess just understand at the end of the day, you can put out as much information as you can, but at the end of the day, it's up to the people making the decisions. It's what they do with that information. And so you do have to try and, I guess, separate yourself from that aspect of it a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know we've been trying to catch up for a little while, and there's just so much going on around the world at the moment. And I know that you've been under intense pressure lately because of the devastating fires around the world, because I know your work crosses many continents. When these events happen, everyone wants advice. Everyone wants a chunk of you and everyone that's involved in this area. The media calls, the agencies call, and your work is suddenly in a very high demand. But when the fire's settled, that attention then tends to fade away. How do you make sense of that cycle where your expertise is urgently needed one moment and almost forgotten the next, especially when you are trying to help people learn and improve things for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's nature of the beast, really. People get interested in things as they're happening and then can very quickly forget about them after they stop happening. So I think for us, it's just to try and make ourselves available, to the media and to agencies and the communities when we can and when that need's there. People are willing, are really keen to listen when these sorts of events going on. So you make the most of that, trying to get the message out. But I guess, during other times, it's still really just about, still trying to engage with the community. I mean, we do a lot of work, through our group, just trying to communicate our research to the general community, letting people know that, if you've got a fire bearing down on you and you're not prepared, it's too late to prepare. So, trying to get the message out there that, this is a real thing. It will happen again. And one day it's likely to happen to you. So you need to be ready. So, yeah, it's an interesting pattern, but I guess, it's part of human nature. And all we can do as scientists is try and, accommodate that as best we can, but continue to try and push the message as best we can as well.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, I know what it's like being on the fire front and, when these catastrophic events occur, but it's sort of the weight of the person that's responsible or the person that has to say this could be catastrophic event, because I know we've got the new danger rating system now that takes in catastrophic. They're really heavy words, and I'm just and I know what they mean to me as a firefighter, someone that's been on the fire front. I'm just sort of trying to work out, it's still the same, that weight that you have letting us know. You still have those same emotions and those same feelings because you know what's going to happen, and then you tell us we have to get ready. And it's that cross-pollination that I've always really enjoyed with getting to know you over the years.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, they're heavy words, and the heavier the words, I think the more serious we need to take the responsibility as scientists. As you said, your people's lives are on the line, and so trying to get the message out, you've got to be careful you don't exaggerate it too much, but you don't want to minimize it as well. So you've sort of got to try and pitch the message right so that people understand it and take heed when they need to. So sometimes those sorts of conversations can be really uncomfortable, but again, as a scientist, all we can really do is just present the facts as we see them, as honestly and openly as we can.
Because it's so critical that the work that you and your team do is actually undertaken, because with that knowledge and that wisdom that you provide to us and the agencies, in a lot of ways it helps us prepare for what we're going into and know what to expect. And I know getting caught in a firestorm in 2003, I don't think anyone could have ever described it to me unless you've sort of been through it. But having that information now and understanding what it can actually do and what it can sort of feel like. I guess in a sad way, there's quite a few of us now that have been through that. So I'm sort of, when we talk about the pyrocumulonimbus, and I guess that's a term that most people didn't even know about 10 years ago, but now it sort of gets thrown around a lot. And, most Australians had never heard the term. But I guess watching these events move from theory into real devastating events, such as what we experienced in the Black Summer. I don't know, is there a moment during Black Summer when you saw a plume or a storm or you were looking at some fire behaviour or pattern in your thoughts? Is this the future we have been warning about? Is this what we've been saying? Because I know there's a lot of talk at the moment about what's happening overseas in Europe, in France, in Spain, in North America, in America, Portugal, Greece, and I think Crete even,
Crete,
got devastated yesterday.
A lot of blokes lost their lives.
Yes, very much so. It's just
Yeah.
terrible.
I mean, I think we'd seen it sort of slowly ramping up already before Black Summer. I mean, our mate Rick keeps a tally on pyrocumulonimbus in Australia, and it's been steadily climbing. But I guess for me, Black Summer was a real landmark event in my career in particular, because up until that point, if there was a pyro-CB or pyrocumulonimbus sort of about to happen, they were kind of isolated events. And so, we could sort of sit down, focus on one event, give information about it and so on. That changed in Black Summer, because suddenly it wasn't just one event. It was happening everywhere all at the same time. And I remember just, trying to keep on top of all these multiple events. And in the end, I just realized I just wasn't going to be able to. And so for me, that was a real shift in the way that we'd approach these sorts of phenomena from in the past. And I basically just had to sort of let go and say, we're just going to have to wait for this to finish, and we'll come back and try and figure out what happened, after it's all quietened down. But that for me was the real big, epiphanies, maybe the right word, but yeah, that big realization that things have changed.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when I was working for the RFS during the Black Summer fires, we've flown all over the state, and every time I was up in the plane, I'd see a fire. I tried to look at the cloud plume. I wasn't worried about anything else, just looking at the plume. Is it building? What's it doing? And trying to remember everything that we've learned to see, is it going to get to that point? And I guess that's one of the great things about your work, is that now we are a lot more critical. 30 years ago, when I used to be responded to a fire, you'd look at what colour it was and you'd look at if it's going straight up or whether it's hit an inversion layer. Yep. And that would tell you a lot about the fire. But now I look at it very critically differently. And that's, the work that's been going on, not just here, but around the world. The knowledge that we're gaining, sometimes I feel it's not keeping up with what's changing on the fire ground. Like, we're getting so much knowledge and there's so much great work going on in the field of fire, but the climate seems to be changing quicker than we can keep up almost.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the broader problem across, institutions and across society, there's a whole bunch of different timescales that come into play. So you've sort of got, the immediate sort of disaster happening on hours to weeks to maybe months in the case of Black Summer. Then the way we sort of respond to these events is, through political response happens almost immediately. Then you can have a legal response through inquiries and so on, and they can go for a year or, sometimes more. The science actually takes a lot longer to sort of go through it. You're talking, 5 to 10 years, sometimes even longer for, to do the work, to analyze all the data, or process the data before you begin analyzing it, do all the analysis, write up the work, get it peer reviewed, get it published. Then once you sort of got to that stage, then you can start to sort of say, well, this is, properly verified science. Then you can sort of start to go to the agencies and the responders and sort of say, well, this is what we've learned from these events. And then you start another process, which is exactly how do you utilize the research? So there's all these sort of, different processes happening across different timescales, and science is kind of one of the ones that takes the longest to happen. I think there's been a lot of work done, through some of the centres that have existed about sort of streamlining that a bit more, making it happen a little more, quickly and effectively. But yeah, this is all happening in the background with the climate changing. The reports out of Europe, have climate scientists really worried that it's actually changing much quicker than had been anticipated. So we're in a bit of a a dangerous race, I would say.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that because, being on farm, I see the effects both from a fire perspective, but also from a farming and an agricultural perspective. And it's almost like a double whammy. And I know you've spent quite a few years working in Domingos Vegas in Portugal at Coimbra studying extreme fire behaviour. And I was fortunate enough to be there 4 years ago and have a look at all the great work that you've been involved with. That collaboration across the globe, I find quite fascinating because we've sort of only really started to do that probably, I reckon, in the last 5 to 7 years. Before that, it was literally unheard of in a very detailed way. And so I'm interested to know, when I went to Portugal, I presented the paper on mental health and trauma in firefighting. But it was clear that the human impact of those fires is felt everywhere. You have the science, and you've seen the science, the dangers, the emotional weight of those events up close. When you think back to some of the work that you're doing in Portugal and still do, what stands out for you about that work and that collaboration that you've been doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think Domingos is a good friend of mine. I was very fortunate to come across him when I did. I remember reading a paper of his where he was talking about, what's now called eruptive fire behaviour. And it was an example of a type of fire behaviour which really violated a lot of the assumptions that were, people assumed about fire, say, traditionally. So it was kind of almost good to find a kindred spirit in that sense.
Yeah.
And so I reached out to him, and then I had a chance to go to the conference in Portugal in 2006, that was. And that's where I sort of got to meet him and got to know him as a person. And then I went back and visited him in 2010, and we were able to verify some of the particular modes of fire behaviour that we'd been looking at. We're able to verify those in his lab. That's probably one of the highlights of my career, sort of seeing the look on the faces of his team as this fire went in a direction they were, no one expected it to go sideways, but they all sort of watched and sort of went, oh, it's gone sideways. And then you could see them all get excited. And that sort of, started a collaboration, which is, still going in a sense. And I'll catch up again with him later in this year. So, yeah, and I think it's really good to make those connections around the world. And, we have colleagues across Europe now and the US and that we work with. And there's been this, I guess, what I see as an emergence of interest in these more extreme fire behaviours over the last 10 to 15 years. And it's always good for me because, a lot of what I do is sort of, I guess, identifying a problem, realising I don't have the skills to solve it, and then knowing that I can reach out to that network to sort of lean on people who can. So, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I was probably remiss of me to say that you are a professor with the University of New South Wales, and you've got a really good team working there with you.
Yeah, we've grown the team steadily over the years, and a good bunch of people. And I think, one of the things I really try and instill in all of the guys and girls here is that, what we do really doesn't count for anything unless we're putting it into the hands of the people who need it. So, really trying to encourage them to take an active role in communicating the research and engaging with the community.
Yeah, it's so critical because there's industries that, like in the agricultural industry, quite a few years ago, there was a big push because there was a lot of research going on at the time, but none of it was actually hitting the ground. And so there was a lot of great work being done, a lot of great people doing the research, but it wasn't being replicated, and it wasn't actually helping us do our job better. And that's one thing I really admired about you over the years, is that you're very generous with your time and your knowledge. And every time I've asked you a question, you may not have answered it right there, but you've always gotten back to me, both you and Rick. I've always really appreciated the knowledge that you guys have shared, because as I said, it's shaped the way that I do things on the fire ground, and the way that I see things, and also the way that I then share that knowledge with other people.
Yeah, true. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess my motto is I'll talk to whoever wants to listen. So, but yeah, I mean, seriously though, I do see what we're doing as really important for keeping people safe, public and firefighters. And, I guess a lot of what we do is really just try to improve situational awareness around, the potential for fire to do things you may not have experienced it do before. So, yeah.
Yeah. And there's definitely, it's the one thing that everyone's saying about Europe and North America at the moment. It's they've had intense fires and catastrophic fires before, but they're just getting one after another, after another, after another, and but multiple events all at the same time across the continents. So resources are stretched, people are stretched, and I noticed the RFS we're now sending helicopters over to France, and I don't think we've ever, not from my recollection, ever
I
sent
can't
resources
recall. Yeah,
to Europe
yeah,
before.
yeah. No, I mean it's kind of interesting to watch it unfold because there's this almost like this element of surprise. Why is this happening? Where I mean, we've known this is coming for a long time now. But yeah, having said that, seeing it, actually occur, and as you said, just the expanse that has been covered by these big fires, and France just having its first pyrocumulonimbus event. It's welcome to the age of violent pyroconvection.
No, and it's so interesting watching it because my heart goes out to a lot of these fire agencies because I think it was in England I was reading about. They were stretched to capacity. They had 100 firefighters on this one fire. But then you're sort of like, they don't experience fires like this.
Yeah.
For them, it would have been very, very scary, unknown. A lot of the people would have been unprepared, the public. But I think what they were trying to get across in the article that they didn't make very clear is they had multiple fires occurring. And so I think by the time I got to the end of the article, it said they have to start teaching the public to not flick their cigarettes, to not disposable barbecues. I didn't even know that was a thing, but apparently they have disposable barbecues, so they must use it and then throw it away. I'm not quite sure. I'll have to Google that one.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's that different perception, and I just think I just want to go over there and help them. It's like, I want to share my knowledge. I want to share my experiences. So it must get quite frustrating for you at times with the knowledge that you have watching things happen. It's not that we have the answers for everything. I think in a lot of ways, if you know what to expect, you're more prepared.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's interesting. I was talking to a firefighter from Manchester Fire Brigade. So, traditionally just an urban fire brigade. 2010 it was, and he was asking. He knew what was coming. He said, we aren't prepared for this. We need to learn from Australians how to deal with these sorts of things. So I'm not exactly sure, how far they've got with those sorts of preparations. But I mean, again, we go to the conferences like we do in Portugal. We try and share as much information we can about that. I don't know if you ever met Sebastien Lahaye, who came out, spent a year working with us. He's a French firefighter. So he came out and did a whole lot of work around fire safety and extreme events. So yeah, I mean, we're looking at the moment of expanding our collaborations with people in England and further across Europe, just to, really just to respond to the fact that what we're dealing with is a global problem. Extreme fires are happening all around the world, and it's a global problem. It's gonna need that global response to address it.
You're absolutely right. And when you see it on the news, you just think, oh God, my heart just goes out to these communities because it's going to happen more. I know we're coming into a big El Nino here. They're talking about it again today on the Country Hour. Today when I was coming to Canberra, and so now we're already starting to prepare on the farm for moving into a very quick, harsh drought. Because it's going to, for everything they're saying, it's going to hit hard and it's going to hit quick, and then that has repercussions for preparedness for fire. So I'm already starting to prepare the farm for this fire season. And Robert said, it's a bit early. And I said, well, I'm not prepared to take the risk this year. I know it'll be freezing cold one day and within a week we'll be soaring at 30 degrees and it'll just flick like a switch, which is very
and I mean, it's sort of hard too, because if you looking out my window now, driving around the place, a lot of the land still looks pretty green in a lot of areas. So people sort of need to understand that can change very rapidly.
Yep.
And there's a bit of moisture in the soil now, but that can dry up pretty quickly if the rain stops. And once the heat comes in, then I mean, I always try to let people know any fire season in Australia is potentially a bad fire season.
Yes.
But when you have these big signals like the patterns we're seeing in the Pacific at the moment, it's time to time to take heed.
Yeah. So we're seeing fires really behave in new ways. Is there one concern that worries you more about any of the others, where things are actually heading?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's just the scale of the events, and the fact that they're all happening at once. As I said, during Black Summer, that was the big sort of realization for me, that the old way of doing things, at least for me, sort of looking at one fire at a time, even though it was an extreme fire, looking at one fire at a time just wasn't feasible anymore.
Yes.
You were getting the entire southeast going up. We had the so-called Australian New Year super outbreak. 30 odd pyro-CBs within a few days. That's to me the most kind of worrying thing, that if that's kind of where we are now in that's how we were then in 2019, 2020. Canada then kicked off in 2023, and it's doing it again now. If we're starting to get these vast scale events happening every 3 years for 3 to 5 years in different parts of the world, that's going to put real limitations on the way we can respond to these, not just nationally but globally. We share a lot of resources between the north and the southern hemisphere. Is that going to be feasible going into the future? We rely on volunteers in Australia to work. Historically, maybe they're worked a couple of weeks out of the season.
Yeah.
Now they've got to work across the whole 3 months. That's going to have ramifications for fatigue and mental health. So it's really the ramping up in the scale of the events that I think is the most concerning.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And the one thing that I guess sticks in my mind from my perspective is, with a lot of the fire behaviour and a lot of the catastrophic events now, we can't actually fight them. Like, we can't go out in the paddock and bash them down and hit it down with the hose and then follow it up. It's just not going to happen. We're not going to be actually actively fighting the fire as such. It's almost, we're going to have to stand back and let it run, but protect people, protect communities, protect resources, protect houses and schools, or whatever it may be in that line where the fire's travelling. And that's one of the things that worries me, is that we will not have the opportunity. I'm hoping we will, but we won't have the opportunity to actually get in there and try and do something. And from a firefighter's perspective, that's just like really challenging, really challenging.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I mean the line I give to the media about these sorts of things is you put these fires out 5 years before they start, and so that really comes down to, again, using state-of-the-art science to really try and get a better understanding of this hazard. And I sort of say this hazard opposed to sort of traditional ordinary fire. Extreme fires and dynamic fire behaviour, present a different hazard. You're not just talking about a front of flames anymore. You're talking about, fire wells and ember storms and pyrocumulate embers. So really trying to understand the nature of the hazard better, and then using that understanding to be able to target more, better targeted and more effective risk mitigation strategies. So, prioritising particular areas for prescribed burning or thinning or something like that. Really hitting the whole public education angle really hard, making sure people are aware. And I think, we've come a long way in those respects, but still a lot we don't know.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I mean, even my brain working now, getting prepared for this fire season. Robert and I were having a conversation last night about some of the people along our road that are now getting quite elderly, and we're just going to get them out. We're not even going to let them, it's not even going to be an option for us to let them stay. We're just going to make sure that someone gets them out as a priority, because I don't think those options are there for a lot of people now. And the other thing also is, because the fire behaviour is changing and because the fires are becoming more intense a lot quicker and multiple. When I started firefighting 40 years ago, you could have 3 or 4 fires, on the urban interface, and sometimes in one day, but you'd have the time to get to know and understand fire, and, you'd watch it hit this bit of shrub and it'd go, it'd race, but where it hit something else and it wouldn't do anything. So you had that time and you had that opportunity to get to know what you were watching and what you were doing. And so you could almost have your own sort of like predictions about going out there and understanding the bush and understanding your pumps and your hoses and the whole scenario. I'm worried that people aren't going to have that opportunity to do that now. There's just not going to be the time frame leading into a lot of these stuff. So their first
Yeah.
fire potentially could be one of the worst fires.
Yeah. No, I think that's right, Viv. I mean, the nature of these sort of extreme fire events and, their dynamic nature means that they can escalate very rapidly and they can do things which totally defy intuition. So, as you said, in the old days, you got to sit and watch a fire and get an appreciation for what it was going to do when and where. And yeah, the dynamic nature of these events means that that's just, not something you can rely on anymore.
Yeah, because the impetus was, especially for in the national park, and it was 100 meters off a trail burning up to a management trail. We just sit there and watch it and let it burn to the trail. There was no mad rush. It was just it was a tool that we had that we were able to use, but I don't know if that's an option anymore. Things have just changed so rapidly. I guess also looking at the other side of things, because I don't want to dwell on the negatives all the time, but what actually gives you hope? Where do you see progress or possibilities for us going into the future with everything that we've just discussed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, as I said before, I think we have actually learned a lot over the last few decades about stuff we didn't understand about fire beforehand. There's a lot of new technologies and things like that coming out, which are giving us greater insights into these sorts of things as well. Things like AI, I'm sort of on the fence about a little bit. I think there's a lot of potential there, but there's a lot of potential for it to go bad as well. But I think, I mean, one of the things that really gives me hope is the people involved. I mean, people like yourself who are sort of pushing these messages out. But firefighters out there still volunteering, even though numbers are going down. People still turning up. And a lot of the research we do is because people like that deserve to be kept safe and deserve to have the best sort of science backing up what they're doing. So yeah, I think there's a lot of sort of reasons for hope out there, and people are one of the main ones.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know when I go to conferences, whether it's in Portugal, Scotland, or down at Hobart recently, it's those conversations, the learnings. Every time I go to a conference and meet new people, and there's, even just little apps, that people are developing, just really simple stuff. And I just love listening to everything that they're developing, and the passion is still there. People really love what they do, and it's so nice to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you said, fire is one of those things that people can get really passionate about.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about fire, but it's one of those really elemental things where people sort of get hooked to it. But people out there just have good souls a lot of the time, and they just want to help. And I think that's a really hopeful thing.
Yeah, I think when I look back, I think with the fire, it's that human desire of just wanting to do good and wanting to help. Because everyone I've spoken to through the podcast, it comes back to the same thing, is that it's the people. And we're not only protecting people and communities, we're also working with people that have the same passions, but the passions are the same in terms of why we're there, and it's to do with the people. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, science would often work a lot better without people, but
No, I just want to ask you a question, because I know I've known you for quite a few years. If you could speak to your younger self, Jason, who was just starting out in fire research, what would you tell him?
Gosh.
Because the science area has, like, from when I used to listen to talks, even 20 years ago, it's vastly different to what it is now.
I mean, honestly, I think the one thing I would tell myself is be patient. It goes much slower than you thought it would and you hoped it would, but you just got to keep slogging away at it. I think that was the biggest lesson I've learned over the years is that it's a slow grind getting science into practice. The other thing I guess would be that don't take the relationships you make with people for granted. They're actually a really important part of advancing science.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What do you wish the public understands about fire that they still don't understand?
Well, I mean, hopefully we've had a bit of an effect on improving this somewhat, but I think there's still a lot of the public out there who sort of think of a fire as a front. So, a well-defined front, which is sort of moves across the landscape in a more or less orderly fashion. You have burnt stuff behind, you have unburnt stuff ahead of it. And, when a fire is coming towards your house, you can sort of wait for it to come. And then when it gets too close, you can sort of run away. I think, trying to switch from that perception of fire to, something like an extreme fire that we saw in Black Saturday or Black Summer. If you see that fire coming over your back fence, it's already well on the other side of you. So, I try and, when you're trying to give people an idea of what a firestorm or a pyrocumulonimbus is like, I often say, think of a really bad thunderstorm, where you've got rain pouring down, sheeting everywhere, you've got hail, you've got crazy winds blowing stuff everywhere. So take that picture, get rid of the rain and the hail and replace it with embers and fire and smoke.
Yeah.
And just to try and give people an idea of that, it's going to be chaos. You are going to be in the midst of a tempest. So just I guess trying to get people to understand that not all fires are the same, and what you learn about a fire staring at a campfire or watching a little burn in your backyard is not going to be all that helpful necessarily when you've got a black summer upon you.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's what I try and say to people sometimes when they say, "Oh no, we'll be out." I'm going, "Yeah, no, you can't always do that." And I remember the first firestorm I got caught in 2003. Just like within a split second, thankfully, we were near a building because we were watching cars in a car park the paint was blistering on the bonnet of the car, but there was no fire around it. The mobberoos would go this way, then they'd be back. And, all the fires I'd been to before that, you generally watch the wildlife and they'd give you a fair indication about what's going on, but they were just as confused as everyone else. And then the next thing, the hairs on the back of your neck sort of like stand up. And I'm going, oh my God, something's about to hit. And it's literally a split second. And I remember I was standing there with my brother. And I remember I just grabbed him by the back of the neck, and to this day I still don't know how I did it. And I grabbed him and I reefed him behind a wall, and we both ducked down, and it just flew past.
Yeah.
Bins, you name it. I'd never seen so much debris fly past. Like, it literally only lasted for about 5 seconds, but it just came through so quick and so hard. I'll never, ever forget that moment. You try and explain it to people, and they just like, it's so hard to explain what it's like. But I remember so vividly that split second before it hit, because you could feel it. I don't know why or how, and I could never describe it. But yeah, that's when I really started to pay attention after that. It's one of those things, I guess.
Yep.
I just want to ask you, what keeps you committed to the work that you're doing? Because I know it's tough, and as you say, you need patience, but at times it must be challenging and feel overwhelming, but it's that commitment that you and so many people I know in the field that you demonstrate. What keeps you committed to that? And I know we've talked about the human side of stuff, but and when you say, be patient with yourself, because science does take a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two things really. I mean, I'm a scientist. I mean, and that's to my bones. I have this need to know how things work, and so once I sort of am confronted with something that I don't understand, it's like I need to understand it. So there's always that, which I guess keeps pushing. Probably every scientist will tell you that, right? My particular field is fire, and so the things I get exposed to and want to try and understand is all fire related. But I guess that's kind of my scientific urge that I need to satisfy. Is doing that. But I was a volunteer firefighter in the brigade before I became involved in the research side of things, and you go out and you spend time on the back of a truck with people, and you get to know these people, and they're good people. And I just think, they deserve the best when they go out there. And so I think if there's something I can do to, make that, improve their safety and, the chances of them coming home to their families, then that's, something I'm obliged to do.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I've always loved the work that you do and the work that you've been involved with. And as I said in the introduction, the one thing I do enjoy about our friendship, Jason, is that you're very generous, but you explain things in a way that you can understand. And I've had
Hopefully.
conversations with people and I sort of walk away more confused than when I started. I know the work everyone's doing is so valuable.
Yeah, and I think that was probably another lesson I would give myself, because I think when I started out, I probably wasn't explaining things as well as I can now. So really, I guess, trying to understand that you need to, to communicate to people on a level where they can, you can sort of meet in the middle and have a meaningful exchange rather than one that just being ruthless here.
So I have a signature question, Jason, that I ask everyone and at the end of the podcast. So when everything else falls away, the roles, the expectations and the pressure, what remains at the core of what drives you and your leadership in this area?
Yeah, good question. I haven't really thought about it, Viv, to be honest. I think it's just, recognizing that, that the contributions that, we've hopefully made, I'd like them to have some sort of, legacy or longevity to them. And so that really involves, training up, educating and providing mentorship for that next generation of scientists and firefighters. So I guess that's something you kind of naturally morph into as through your career, is that sort of more of a mentor role. You sort of realize that you can't actually do all the science yourself. You need to sort of delegate. I can remember having somewhat of a midlife crisis at one point in my career, where I sort of went, there's too much science here for me to do. And then it's about the same time I started being able to employ, postdoctoral researchers and things like that, who were then, but actually, letting go of the research myself and allowing other people to sort of, find their way with it was a really important step in my career, I think, to realize that you don't have to be across everything. You can sort of let go and delegate, trust other people. So that's kind of, that's where I'm kind of at now, is just really trying to provide that mentorship and guidance for people who are sort of starting out like I was 20 years ago.
Well, I think you've got a great team there and I've always enjoyed working with you, and I hope you have a great trip to Portugal again in a couple of months' time, and I'm very sad I won't be there this year.
We'll think of you over there. I'm sure people have nice things to say about you, Viv. So
Yeah, well, you have a
you're
sangria for me and I'll be right.
I think you made a real impression when you went over there last time. So
Well, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, I learned a lot. Yeah, and it was a very valuable experience. Yeah. Well, thank you,
yeah, good.
Jason. I really appreciate you spending some time because I know you've got a busy schedule, but I think it's really important to share the journey that you guys face as well. Not just the firefront or running the organisation. There's so many things around that support us is so critical to what we do. So thank you.
No, thank you, Viv. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate it.